Welcome to the April meeting of the Australian Zonta Says Now think tank. My name is Carole Theobald, and I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people in Perth, Western Australia. I'll be hosting today's meeting with the help of Sue Lees from the Zonta Club of Melbourne on Yarra in Victoria and Bridget Mather, who's the chair of Zonta Australia, based in South Australia. I'm showing this picture of the goat jumping off a rock into the unknown, as I'm sure it's how many of us feel gender equality and climate action are headed. We're witnessing global pushback, and we have an election coming up to choose what type of landing we want to have. Bit of housekeeping before we begin. Say hi in the chat, tell us where you're calling from, and use the chat line to make comments. Keep your microphone on mute, ask short questions, succinct questions, and use welcoming and inclusive language. Thank you. This is our programme for today, and we'll see we've got welcome introductions, shaping the future of conservation with Associate Professor Carly Cook. I'll do some reflections of the Commission on the Status of Women. I just got back last week from that. Some international news, Zonta Australia news, other news, and our next meeting. So we'll get into it. Firstly, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in all the places we meet from today and to pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We usually acknowledge a female First Nations leader at the start of each meeting. And in March, 6 of the 16 inductees into the West Australian Women's Hall of Fame were Aboriginal women. They included Dr. Hannah McGlade. Dr. McGlade is a Kurin Minang Noongar woman of the Bibbulmun Nation and was the first Aboriginal woman to complete a law degree in Western Australia. She's dedicated to advocating for Aboriginal rights and supporting Aboriginal women and children impacted by violence. Her advocacy informed the first separate action plan on violence against Aboriginal women and extends to the United Nations Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues. She's a tireless human rights advocate, researcher and community leader. So congratulations to Hannah on a well-deserved induction into the WA Women's Hall of Fame. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. I'll just stop that share. Because what I'd like you to look at is talk about where you're zooming in from today and one thing that you appreciate about your local environment. Okay, so I'll just 5 rooms. Just for 2 minutes. Right, I think we're all back now, aren't we? So I'll just open it up to the floor. What were some of the things that that you appreciated about your local environment? Did you want to start, Sue?
Yes,
Sorry.
Andrew and I were just going to say that we actually live on the banks of the Yarra. And as Carly knows, we're involved with Yarra Flats Park, which is basically outside our front door. And it's just wonderful physically and mentally to have that green space around us and to have the opportunity to kind of look after it now, bring it back from what was basically beautiful bush to farmland, and then now try to bring it back to beautiful bush. So we're very fortunate to have that opportunity.
Is there anything else that anyone would like to share from where they're living? Yeah.
Could I make a comment, Carole?
Yes, Sue. Jane, go for it. Yeah.
I live on the banks of the Werribee River in Weir Views, which is a new suburb in Melton. Melton's one of the driest places in metropolitan Melbourne. Wow. And we have not had any rain for quite a long time. So consequently, what used to be a reservoir is now going back to the river. The reservoir levels have dropped to such an extent, it's basically the river in the bottom of the valley.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Wow.
Anyone else like to share about the one thing they appreciate about their local environment? Vicky?
Yes, thank you, Carole. And of course, being in northwest Tasmania, virtually on the doorstep of beautiful World Heritage areas, and, you know, just magical country. But we were all sharing just how we've recognised the impact of climate change, you know, even somewhere like, you know, Tassie has its own equivalent sort of dry and drought situations, but our west coast, which normally is wet all the time, is steadily drying out, and we're getting dry lightning storms that are creating fires that are burning for weeks and weeks and weeks in the peat, which we've not had before, which is very sad.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share a local place? Just put your hand up or you want to shout out? No? Okay. Just looking around. No. Okay, that's fine. Well, what we'll do is we'll move on. And thank you very much for just setting the scene a bit for our speaker today. We just have another guest that's coming into the place today, Lara Van Ray, but I'll refer to Lara later on. So welcome, Lara. I'll hand over to Sue to introduce Carly. You're on mute, Sue.
Yeah, I'm off mute now.
Excellent.
Okay. Associate Professor Carole Theobald is a conservation scientist and ARC Future Fellow at Monash University. So I looked that up, and the Australian Research Council basically gives funding to some researchers to pursue research of national importance. So that's really good to realise that they consider the work that Carly's doing is hugely important. And Carly is interested in helping managers integrate science into management decisions. She works closely with environmental managers, developing tools that support evidence-based decisions and allow them to know when management is effective. Much of her research is focused on protecting places where nature thrives despite human pressures.
Yeah.
She is currently researching how we can identify important places for biodiversity and support the managers and communities who are involved in conserving nature. She is a member of the Expert Assessment Group for the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Green List of Protected and Conserved Areas. So, Carly, we're really thrilled that you made the time on a Sunday to talk to us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. So over to you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for that lovely welcome, and thanks for inviting me to talk to you all today. I'll just share my screen if that's okay. Can you all see my slide? Yep.
Beautiful.
Yes. So thank you so much for inviting me. When I spoke to Sue about this, she suggested that I share a little bit about the challenges that I see we face in the conservation space. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, but I thought as well as some of the opportunities, I think, where we could make big strides forward. But I thought I might start by sharing a little bit of my journey in terms of how I got here. So I did my undergrad research on the eastern barred bandicoot in the Western Victoria, which was a critically endangered small marsupial, which got me very excited about conservation, but also helped me to understand the scale of the issues that we face with things like invasive predators. But it really, the love of nature really captured my heart, and from there I went and worked in the Park Service. I worked for Parks Victoria for a couple of years in their science branch, looking at things like how do we know whether a management is effective in our national parks, and what do we need to know to support decisions there. And then I spent a couple of years working in the National Parks and Wildlife Service in New South Wales, where I was in their science division, but I was working with the scientists who were doing the science that was not being done in academia. So these were scientists who were mapping all of the wetlands across New South Wales, or looking at mapping all of the major vegetation classes and looking at what good condition looks like. And these are the sorts of things that just research that just wouldn't be done in academia, because it's not the sort of thing that's incentivized. And working with park managers and with the scientists that support them gave me a real perspective on the challenges that managers face in making good decisions. Gave me an understanding of the resource constraints they work within, the just lack of access to evidence, and the fact that so many scientists in academia are not engaging directly with managers. They're not necessarily doing the science that would most benefit them, and they're not talking to them about the outcomes of their research. The scientists are often talking to each other. They're not talking to who could be the end users of their research. So that really got me quite passionate about this idea of bridging the gap between science and practice. So then I went and did my PhD at the University of Queensland, actually looking at how can we help managers better understand whether or not their management is effective. And so I still got to work closely with managers, but also do some science that would benefit them. So that's a theme that's run all the way through my career, and I've always been very attached to protected areas and protected natural places. And so I still work very closely with the World Commission on Protected Areas, which links with the Green List work that Sue mentioned before, as well as working with just people who are trying to protect important places all around the world. So that's been a really lovely experience as well. So in terms of the challenges that I think we face, I think the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis just go hand in hand, and each is going to exacerbate the other. So we really need to address the two things together. But in terms, just as it is with climate change, I think the actions that we're taking are not aligned with the scale of the problem. And one of my great frustrations is political distraction and misdirection, which is leading to confusing the public or pretending that the actions that we're taking are the ones that are needed or creating false dichotomies. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that was very exciting to see towards the end of the last federal government was they undertook the mandated reform review of our primary biodiversity conservation legislation, the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. And Graham Samuels, Professor Graham Samuels did an amazing job of reviewing that legislation and finding that it was just not fit for purpose. And so he wrote a big, long report pointing to all of the challenges and coming up with some really exciting and innovative ways that we could improve that legislation. And the Labor government did commit to making those reforms, but unfortunately have walked away from a lot of that more recently. But I just put this graphic here from the Australian Conservation Foundation, which just points to some of the ways in which this legislation has been failing us. So over 25,000 hectares of endangered species habitat cleared in 2024. More species being added to the threatened species list. Many of our species don't actually they haven't finished the listing process because we haven't even got to the point of putting the science together to understand what their current status is. And I also note at the bottom there that there were 10 new 10 new applications for fossil fuel projects that were approved in 2024, and none of the applications were rejected. But I just put on the slide here one of the key recommendations from the Samuels review was that we should have national environmental standards that take into account cumulative impacts of developments. And this is such an important idea because up until this point, every little small development is assessed on its own merits. But we know that each little piece is part of a greater impact on the environment. And so it would be really game-changing if we could push the government to accept this idea that no project should be assessed in isolation. They should all be assessed in terms of the cumulative impact they're having on biodiversity. So if you're looking for issues to push this current government on, it would be lovely to see them take up this idea of these national environmental standards that Graham Samuels envisaged. One of my other great frustrations is watching governments create these false dichotomies like jobs versus the environment. I know we have some Taswegians on the call, so this may be an issue that's close to your heart. But very recently, the Labor government rushed through legislation to protect salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour. I think actually the legislation will protect salmon farming across Tasmania. And they did that under the guise of, we can't afford to lose this industry. But looking at the impacts that these salmon farms have on the environment is really, it's just staggering. So the salmon farms produce 6 times more pollution each year than the entire sewage system of Tasmania. And I put here on the slide, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this UNESCO World Heritage, but this sort of, so this is the United Nations recognising places of important natural and cultural heritage, and Macquarie Harbour is part of Tasmania's UNESCO World Heritage listing. So we're prioritising jobs for internationally owned salmon farming companies over the massive impacts this has on pristine, or on these world heritage, places that are recognised as internationally significant. So these sorts of things where governments create this false dichotomy are incredibly frustrating, because of course we can have food security and biodiversity together. We just have to make choices slightly differently rather than taking the easy solution. One other thing that I'm not sure whether it would be on people's radar or not, but over the last 20 years, there's been a process of moving state forest into national park, which on the surface of it seems like a great thing in terms of taking areas out of production forest and moving it to what would be a more protected status. But working with park managers, what has been really interesting to better understand about that are the management problems that come with these areas. So we might look at a beautiful, pristine mountain ash forest, but when it's been state park or state forest, it comes in a very different condition. So we're giving over to national parks areas that have been heavily modified through logging. And whilst it's great that we're no longer clearing those areas, there's a legacy of that which introduces management problems like weeds and pests and just restoration issues around trying to bring back the biodiversity as a whole, rather than these sorts of stands that have been, cleared of their big old trees. And one of the things that also comes with this is conflicts with the community. So in state forests, you're allowed to do a lot of things you're not allowed to do in a national park. So you can ride horses and ride your trail bikes and collect firewood. And for many communities, they've been interacting with these places through these sorts of activities, which we think of as higher impact. Even, just walking, you're not allowed to take your dog to a national park. So these sorts of bringing these areas into national parks is going to take a lot of resources to work with the communities to help them understand that these places are transitioning away from places where you could do these activities to places where you can no longer do these activities. And that's really hard for the park managers who live in these communities and who are then needing to enforce the new rules around these places. And so that was something that I hadn't understood until talking to them. And so we really are going to need to better support our national park management agencies if we're going to continue this trend. So not only are we putting resources into trying to manage these conflicts, into trying to manage the issues that the environmental degradation and the sorts of issues that come with these more degraded sites, but we're just spreading resources more thinly if they don't come with more money. So I think it would also be a great thing to really push governments on, if you are going to be increasing the protected area estate, that comes with the money and the resources needed to manage these places properly. And we know that the budgets for most of our protected area management agencies are not growing. So I think that's another issue, another challenge that we face, that advocacy could really support. So enough doom and gloom. What do we think? What do I think some of the solutions could be? Well, I think we need bold action. I think we've done enough tinkering around the edges. We need to be making big steps forward now. And I think that means thinking outside of the box. We need to, business as usual isn't going to get it done. And so what I've been thinking about more and more is about protecting nature where it occurs. So we are never going to be able to take all of the places we might like to protect and put them within protected areas, and nor is that necessarily the most appropriate approach. Protected areas come with some terrible baggage associated with colonial approaches to locking up nature and separating people from nature. And so protected areas have a very bad name in lots of parts of the world where really people were dispossessed and moved away and treated as if they were part of the problem. But actually, people as stewards of nature, when they live in harmony with landscapes, can be incredibly powerful. And this figure that I put up here is from a paper by Stephen Garnett and colleagues, where they looked at where are the intact lands that are important for nature conservation. And they found that 37% of all of the remaining intact lands are being managed by Indigenous peoples. So we really need to be supporting them to continue to support nature. So the thing that I've been thinking about of late is this idea of conserved areas. So we have protected areas, which often come with this legal and formal protection, but it's been increasingly recognised that there are places outside of protected areas where biodiversity is being effectively conserved. So lots of different kinds of places where biodiversity still exists, despite the fact that it might not even be the primary purpose of those areas, but the way those areas are being managed enables biodiversity to continue to persist. And the more that I've looked into this, the more amazed I've been at the huge diversity of places where this can occur. So in Australia and all around the world, we have surfing reserves. And these are places that are set aside to protect places that, that surfers love to go. But by putting those aside and preventing things like fishing from taking place, we're creating these sort of pseudo-protected areas. They're not there for the biodiversity, they're there for human enjoyment, but just by their nature, they're actually creating opportunities for conservation, and which is a really lovely sort of byproduct in that case. Old cemeteries are really important places for orchid conservation. So in many places, the way that these areas are managed means that people are slashing at certain times of year, and by then reducing the grass biomass, if they've actually been managing rare orchid populations. Some of them are only now found in cemeteries. So are really one of those things that you wouldn't necessarily think of as a place for biodiversity, but where some of the best remaining populations of things like rare orchids occur. Some roadside reserves have some of the really lovely remnants of highly fragmented ecosystems. In Victoria, some of our nice grassland remnants are part of roadside reserves. And in other parts of the world, places like sacred groves and other sorts of sacred natural sites are places that have been sort of set aside for spiritual reasons rather than necessarily biodiversity reasons, but can be places that through that protection that comes from that spiritual connection to place can also lead to biodiversity outcomes. And I popped this little central rock rat up here because it was recently rediscovered. They thought it was extinct, but it's now been found in 3 different places in Central Australia, one of which is a sacred natural site, and another is part of a pastoral lease. So there are places in Australia where keeping cattle at very low densities can be compatible with nature conservation. And I put up these travelling stock routes as well, as these are sort of places where people have been moving cattle across different properties for hundreds of years. So they're connections across the landscape, which often we've lost. And if we don't have those connections, then species can't move through the landscape. But by keeping these travelling stock routes, which cattle only move through at certain times of the year, then we have these places that have very low impact from grazing, but potentially have really important benefits to biodiversity, both through being set aside from other uses, as well as being these connections through the landscape that can be really important for species. And then we have wonderful people who just keep nature on their properties, so land for wildlife. Some people put their properties under covenants, which would come under the category of protected areas, but there are just people out there who love nature, have a bit of bush on their property and take care of it. And local council reserves, so this is just a sample of some of the places where biodiversity is still existing outside of protected areas. And if we can focus more on trying to protect and support these places to continue to achieve biodiversity outcomes, then we can think about conservation at more of a landscape scale. So rather than thinking about little parcels of land, thinking at that broader scale. And this sort of landscape scale is really more of a way that communities have managed in around the world. So I met some Indigenous women from Hawaii last year, and they were talking about this idea of ridge to reef conservation, where they don't see the sorts of separations that we do. So talking about terrestrial or land-based and marine or ocean-based just didn't make sense in their minds, because they manage from the ridge down to the reef. It's all connected. They think about the watershed at the top of the mountains, how nutrients flow through, how what you do on land impacts what happens in the ocean. And so thinking at this sort of landscape scale being really critical to us actually being able to make a difference. And if we're thinking about broadening our definition of the sorts of places that we should be conserving, if we're thinking about where is the nature and then constructing our conservation strategies around that, I think we can do much better at this broad scale conservation. So not trying to cram everything into this protected area model, but protecting the biodiversity where it occurs and thinking about it as part of a connected land and seascape. So they're the things that I've been thinking about. And the more I look to see that nature is thriving in places that we don't necessarily think much about, the more I am heartened by the fact that even in places where we're not necessarily focusing on biodiversity conservation, we are still achieving outcomes for nature, and we could support those places. Bridget, I see you have your hand up. Did you have a question?
I was going to wait till the end, but...
Okay, that's fine. I'm nearly done. So I did just want to also end on a hopeful note. One of the things that gives me hope, well, I get to work with young people in my role at a university. I get to work with graduate students and I get to work with undergraduates. And when I talk to younger generations, I have an enormous amount of hope. The young people coming through are so much more aware of the issues. They're so much more open-minded. And I really think we need to get out of their way and let them lead, because I think they really are very switched on. And I can see big changes happening as they step into leadership roles. And where do women fit in this picture? Well, I think a lovely thing is that that conservation science is really dominated by women. I'm not quite sure why that is, but the vast majority of my research group and of the undergraduates that I teach are young women, and so that's I think women as conservation leaders is much more accepted. The conservation community being dominated by women, I think, also is very aware of that. And women as community leaders speaking for their important places, I think, is another really important way that women can be involved in conservation. And I've been lucky enough to meet lots of women in those positions, and I think women do a fantastic job of speaking up for the places that are important and thinking about that intergenerational importance of protecting these places. So I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening.
Bridget, over to you, the questions.
Thank you for that. That resonated at a couple of levels. Working in local government, I was always aware of road reserves being important, but I've never thought of cemeteries in the same way, but I certainly will now. I was just wondering, from a Zonta Australia perspective, we were set up to do advocacy at the national level, and you mentioned the Graham Samuel's work, and I just wondered, we are not subject experts in a lot of this, in a lot of these areas, but Carly, you obviously are. And if at any stage you'd like to partner with us with you bringing your subject matter expertise onto that, and we then presenting the advocacy to the relevant ministers, post-election, of course, we would be more than happy to be involved in that type of partnership if you thought it was worthwhile for Zonta Australia to put their name to it.
Graham Samuels did the most wonderful, comprehensive job. And so to see his work sidelined is really disappointing, but it's all there. He's written a blueprint that we could just pick up and run with because it's, really important, the work that he's done.
Okay. And we will certainly be keen to do something like that. Excuse me. The other one was at the more local level when you said we need bold action now. If you were to ask, we've got 2,000 members in about 100 clubs across Australia. If you were to think of one thing that you would like us to ask our clubs to do at either practical level, and again, I'm going back to your conservation and conserved areas and all those other practical demonstrations, what would be that one thing that we could ask the clubs and then members? Because lots of them get involved, but then struggle to think, what do we do next? Because it is sometimes overwhelmingly big, the issues.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate that feeling of the issues being so big. And I was thinking about this over the last couple of days because I thought this might be a question that I would get asked. And, I still think writing to your local MP is incredibly powerful. I once heard that, I'm not exactly sure if this statistic is apocryphal or not, but that they take one letter written from a constituent to represent the views of 10,000 other local. So every time we have an opportunity to write to an MP, I think it's worth doing, picking issues that are close to your heart and writing to your local MP to say, this is something that's important to me, without trying to get too political. Watching this Labor government be so disappointing on the environment has made me reflect on, voting Green and preferencing Labor doesn't seem to achieve what, get across that message that I wanted, that they're not good enough on the environment. But I do wonder whether the potential power of independence rising could be something that is entering the minds of politicians. If I could clone David Pocock and have him stand in every electorate in Australia, I would love to do that. But, I think writing to your local member and saying, I'm very disappointed in the outcomes that this government have provided on the environment, and I'm trying to decide where to send my vote, and if there's a local independent who's going to be better on the environment than you, then I'm going to direct my vote that way. Just to let them know that, because I really do feel like left-wing governments can take those of us who care about the environment for granted. And, the strategy of pointing to them that we want them to be more left, I think they recognise that, well, you're ultimately going to support them over the right wing. But if there was another alternative where there's an independent who's, left-leaning in your electorate, pointing to the fact that they are an alternative and these are the issues that you care about, I think those are the things that I think we can at least be putting on the radar of our local MPs. These are the things that are important to us, and we represent a significant proportion of the community, and there are things that we can do that won't just necessarily fall in line behind them because they're better than the alternative.
And of course, we could do that at a couple of levels. We could do it at the national level, but we could also do state level, and local government also has a role to play there. So you could do quite a little bit that's bespoke in a sense to the district that you live in. Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And just trying not to use that form letter. If you can, just put it in your own words and pick the issues, 2 or 3 things that are really close to your heart. I think pushing for those, I think, the more people we can get to do that, I think the more, we'll turn, a whisper into a tidal wave.
Thank you.
Vicky, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Carly, thank you very much. I'm finding it fascinating, but I wanted to just get back. I did write to my local members and federal members on invasive species issues, because, you know, they're devastating, how invasive species are impacting so readily on our, especially our biodiversity and endangered little beasties, especially over here, and feral cats. You know, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to work out how bad they are across the nation. I got one reply, and it was from an independent, independent member, so that was encouraging, and it wasn't a standard reaction reply, so that was really encouraging for the first time that I'd had something like that. But it's like you send it out there and you get an acknowledgement they've received your letter, but I don't seem to get a follow through.
Yeah, and it's a little hard to know whether we'll see the impact individually of those sorts of actions, but the more people who do it,
Yeah,
those seeds are at least being planted. But yeah, I think you can also talk to your local councils about cat curfews, because that's something that we can do on a local level, and federal governments and state governments aren't going to be doing those things. But, you know, cat curfews, certainly my local council has one, but it doesn't start till it doesn't cover dawn and dusk. So, you know, not really very helpful if
yeah.
we capture that.
Yes. Thank
Carly,
you.
in the chat line, we have Lara's asked if you could share the graphic that you had so she could share it on
Oh,
social.
absolutely. I'm happy to share the slides. I did see somebody ask maybe if I could share the Samuel's review. I'd be happy to pop a link in.
Yes,
In the chat line, that would be wonderful. Did we have any other questions from people? Just put your hand up, please. Ask questions there. You'd mentioned earlier, Carly, that you had a researcher that you were working with at the moment, an Indigenous woman doing her PhD or something?
Right, yes. So unfortunately, she hasn't been able to take up her PhD position. One of the difficult things, so she's a mature age student, and yeah, the ability, like, you know, it just wasn't going to be financially viable for her, even though Monash has additional funding to support students, Indigenous students. But I was very excited about her project because she wanted to explore Indigenous science. And she wanted to do that from within a science faculty within a university, because this idea of sort of local ecological knowledge or traditional knowledge is often seen through the lens of sort of more the social sciences. And so for her, she wanted to really demonstrate that there was a scientific process used by Indigenous communities. And so I hope at some point she'll be able to make that work. But it was, yeah, an exciting idea. I think when she first approached me, I said, I think I know enough to know that I don't know anything in this space. And she said, well, you're the person for me, because if you can start from a place of that, then you probably have an open enough mind, because I think many scientists sort of struggle in that interdisciplinary space. And so, but I think that's where really the exciting stuff gets done.
Excellent. Sue?
So Carly, how important is it for Australia to get the COP, or is it important? And if we do get the COP, do people like you get a role?
It's a good question. I think, well, certainly if we got the COP, it would put the focus on climate action in Australia. We've just been so inadequate in that space. And, you know, certainly there are opportunities to do that. Monash has sent a delegation to the COPs on multiple occasions. So we have a group on environment and sustainability, and they often send a delegation. But working at those international levels is sort of something a little outside of my my area of expertise. Sort of, I've been engaging with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, but the United Nations is its own beast, and yeah. So yeah, sorry, Sue, I probably can't give you a very good answer to that. But anything that brings the focus on the fact that we need urgent action. And I was just listening to an economist the other day who was saying that she thought her number one issue was action on climate change because of the environment, the financial impact, and the impact on the economy that a lack of action on climate change will have. So once we get the economists on our side, then I think we maybe have a better chance of getting rapid action in this space.
That's great. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'll put it back to Sue to wrap up.
So Carole, that was absolutely fantastic today. I think you've for us, you've bridged that science issue of, actually understanding the non-scientist actually being able to understand the scientists and the science and why it's so important. So you've done that very well with us today. And then your work on bridging the gap between science and practice with professionals, I think that is just so important, particularly when you showed us your ideas about the big picture, because I think people get so locked into their issue or their area or their piece of work. And what we need to do is we need to, as you say exactly, we need to be looking at the overall picture, and it takes a few great minds to really work that one out and explain to the others how to do that. So it's been really worthwhile for us today, Carole, and we look forward to following your work. And Bridget, that's a brilliant idea about Zonta trying to work with Carole. I think you'll get a lot of support for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I think
Thank you so
the work that you're all doing is wonderful, so keep it up.
It's brilliant.
Okay, before you go, Carole, I have to ask you, are you going to Snake Island?
Yes, yep.
Yeah, so I just explained to the others that we, Carole and I have mutual friends who have been going to this area of Wilson's Prom called Snake Island for probably over 30 years, every year for a weekend, usually around Anzac Day. And it's the most beautiful, precious space. Hardly anybody knows about it, which we rather like. And it's just off Wilson's Prom. And it just goes to show that when something's pretty much left alone, but managed at the same time, it can actually pay dividends.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Getting
Carole.
people out into nature is a great way to help them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's brilliant. Thank you,
Wonderful.
Carole.
Thank you all. I'll share my slides if people
Brilliant.
wanted to see that.
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. If you could email them, that would be lovely. I really appreciate that.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
I just want to hand over to Lara Van Ray for a few minutes. I had the great delight of meeting Lara on a Zoom meeting with Wendy Quinn, and also Debbie Dunn from Hobart. And Lara is a documentarian, field producer and social impact producer based in Tasmania. And she's been working on this project Silver Power, but I'd like to just hand over to Lara. I don't want to steal your story. So I'll take the share off and put it to you.
Oh, thank you so much. This is a very lovely opportunity. I wanted to talk to you about a project that I'm working on, which it was really interesting to hear, working with the younger generation and especially younger women coming through, that they are very much on board of what we need to do to protect our planet. And so I understand that myself too. And so as a documentarian and trying to create impact and change, I've come up with a with a project which is actually going to the complete opposite of the younger generation and going to the older generation, the retired generation. Because what I'm finding is that the younger people are already on board. And also, if we're looking at doing some really serious work about saving the planet, usually it takes time and it takes money to do those things. And the group of people that usually has the most of those things is retired people, as well as wisdom and freedom. I know for me and my family here, the working people in the family are gagged. We actually can't speak. There's a lot of things we can't do. And we're just chasing our tail trying to get food on the table, really. So when it comes down to actually doing the work to save the planet, which is literally getting our hands into the ground, on the ground, or throwing money at people who are doing the good work already. I'm feeling there's a great capacity for people who are retired or out of work, and it's sitting at about 20% of the population. So I've started this project called Silver Power, which is using the power of filmmaking. So we're doing capturing amazing stories of fantastic retired people who are doing some incredible work. I don't know if you've noticed, you probably have, like looking around that, many land cares, beach patrol, amazing things are happening by people who are retired who've got the freedom to do it. So this project is capturing the stories of some people doing amazing work in that space, and then showing those stories back out to try and inspire other retirees to get on board, to join the fight to save the planet, which is either joining by donating, because there's lots of people doing this good work, or to volunteer time. And so that's the project, and I've just put a link down in the chat for you to just have a look at it. But the major part of this is what I'm hearing on the ground. We were just talking about politics and voting as well. It's like, I don't know, the younger generation seem to be voting for the planet and for the environment, where the older generation, there's a lot of mixture there. So this is a sort of project which is trying to address that as well, just like, showing people how to make changes so that we can protect our planet. Because a lot of people I'm running into are just like, oh, I'd love to do something, I just don't know what to do, I don't know how to do anything. And a lot of the time too, it's also, I'd love to do something, but it's the kids have got it, I'm looking down and the planet's in good hands. And so this project is saying it is in good hands, it's in your hands, and you can do something as well. So a major part of that is building a website where people can say, oh, I live in this area and I'm interested in this thing, trees, beach, whatever, plastics. And the website will immediately show up their local groups, their local beach care, their local land care, and then it will go statewide, and then it will go Australia-wide, so that people can really see who's in their area that they can be joining to do something, take that action. And if they can't join, then throw some money at it, maybe. So that's the project, and I'm here because I'm asking for help. It's a big project, and so I'd love any advice from anyone. At the moment, I'm just taking it around to as many people as I can to pick people's brains. If there's anyone that has any advice on how to get this up, I would love to hear from you. And in that document, I think is an email address at the bottom there that if anyone has any advice or any tips for stories of people doing amazing things, and also we're looking obviously for philanthropy and any sort of partnerships that you can think of, we'd love to hear from you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lara. Thanks for joining us today. You're obviously welcome to stay, and for sharing what sounds to be a really inspiring project. It gets people activated and involved. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll move on with our programme today. So it's lovely to sort of hear from Lara. You should check out some of her work online. It's brilliant. Oh, and Vicky's got a hand up. Vicky? You're on mute, Vicky.
Sorry, I was just acknowledging Lara's work and effort. So that it was a thumbs up, not a hand up.
I'm sorry. Brilliant. Thank you.
you.
Excellent. That's excellent. Well, what I was going to do is quickly go through a presentation I gave yesterday at the Area 3 workshop in Western Australia, which was all about, is the United Nations under threat? And this is following my visit to the Commission on the Status of Women in New York. I only got back last week, so it's all very fresh. So I want to just sort of quickly point out where gender equality and climate action fit in the UN, the challenging environment that we're working in, some personal observations and what we can do. And there's various pictures throughout from the UN premises. In 95, Hillary Clinton said human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. And it's at this conference on women that they had the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was basically adopted. It's a blueprint for gender equality, has 12 areas of concern. And if you've not read it, read it, because it's really a what to do about gender equality internationally. Anyway, it sits under, in the United Nations, they have 6 organs. You've got the General Assembly that sits over everything, and then you've got these 5 other organs underneath. The Commission on the Status of Women sits within the Economic and Social Council, called ECOSOC. It's made up of 45 member states who get voted in for 5 years by ECOSOC members, and its job is to monitor and report on the Beijing Platform for Action. And there's 198 countries ratified it, and it's not legally binding, unfortunately. But they all come together at the Commission for the Status of Women event in New York each year. It's only ever held in New York. And I think of it as the COP for gender equality. Now, there's only 168 non-government organizations with general consultative status at the UN. Zonta is one of them. This is very important because at CSW, there are 2 streams of activity. One in the United Nations building where all governments meet, and the non-government organizations who meet across the road in various other buildings, and that's where civil society meets. So Zonta has observer status, so can actually be in the UN building, which is quite important. It's where the governments actually meet. So there were thousands of women there. When it comes to climate action, climate crisis, human rights crisis, women's rights crisis, Antonio Guterres. When you look at climate, that sits under the Secretariat. And when you look at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the overarching document for climate, first article, the parties should protect the climate system for the benefit of present and future generations of humankind on the basis of equity, etc. Very strong statement. 198 parties signed it, and that is the parent document for the Kyoto Protocol as well as the Paris Agreement, legally binding. So at the annual conference of the parties, that's where all the governments and civil society meet to assess the progress against the UN Framework Convention. And the next one is being held in Belém in Brazil later this year. So it just gives you a bit of a context. The challenging environment. Before I went to New York, I was advised of this letter. This was the US representative to ECOSOC, basically saying to the UN Women Executive Board that the United States is reviewing international organizations and bodies of which we're a member to assess our relationship and determine which organizations align with US interests. Later in the letter, they say we urge UN Women to focus on efforts to ensure the equality of women and girls and insist upon avoiding a focus on radical causes such as diversity, equity and inclusion and gender ideology. Gender ideology is code for LGBTQI, okay? So the shot was across the bows. The USA has also threatened to withhold all of its funds to the UN Okay, UN Women is quite concerned about this. So it's looking at moving its operations away from New York to Bonn and to Nairobi, with perhaps a small presence in the US. So the stakes are high. The pendulum is swinging backwards. These are some of the banned words on the USA government websites: diversity, equity, inclusion, climate change, climate crisis, LGBTQ, system racism, social justice, advocacy, equality, equity, equitable, can't even say it, gender, female, you can say male, women, you can say men. So there's many, many more. It's so disturbing. They also have the SAVE Act, which basically requires in-person documentary evidence of being a US citizen to enable you to vote. Married women will have to show their birth certificate, their marriage certificate if they don't have a passport. So it's putting the barriers in place for people to vote. USAID slashed, that's 40% of global aid. Millions of people are impacted by this around the world. Reproductive rights gone. The Federal Department of Education about to go. Domestic violence programs defunded, and USA's pulled out of Paris and the SDGs. It's horrific, but it's also impacting us in Australia. So many of our universities depend on funding from the US, and they put out this questionnaire, 3 questions. Can you confirm that there's no DEI, it's not a DEI project? Can you confirm it's not a climate or environmental justice project? And does it take appropriate measures to protect women and to defend against gender ideology, LGBTQI? It's just unbelievable. This artwork also left me speechless. They put this counter, it starts at 0 each day. And I was there at 3 in the afternoon, and it showed that $238 million had been spent that day up to that time on military expenditure. The big yellow circle is military expenditure, and the little tiny one is disarmament. It's upside down. So, personal observations. This Anthony, I just love the feminist in chief, as we refer to him. This is what he said. I'll just make sure I've got my sounds sharing on there. Fair sound, okay. This is what he said.
Women's rights are under siege. The poison of patriarchy is back, and is back with a vengeance, slamming the brakes on action, tearing up progress, and mutating into new and dangerous forms. But there is an antidote, and that antidote is action. Now is the time for those of us who care about equality for women and girls to stand up and to speak out. Now is the time for the world to accelerate progress and deliver on the promise of Beijing.
Brilliant words. In Zonta land, we had 187 Zontians were involved either in person or online from 32 countries. We had 2 youth observers that were there, one from Australia and one from Germany, and 15 Zontians had UN passes, which meant that they could go into the UN building. And I was one of the lucky ones to have one of those passes. Zontians were involved in 20 events that we either hosted or had people on the panel, discussion panels of. So you can tell by the tone that there was a lot of pushback against gender equality around the world, and everyone there was united in their anger and in their solidarity to do something about it. The emotion was amazing. So this is just queuing up to get a pass to go into the UN. And this is some of the Zonta Says Now team outside the UN building with Stephen Lynn from the Men Engaged Network. Some of the sessions were held in smaller conference rooms in the UN building. You can see there's not much space, people sit on the floor. And then some of the bigger rooms, like this was the ECOSOC chamber. And here we've got Michelle Bachelet, the former president of Chile and the former CEO of UN Women. And here is the chair of the ECOSOC committee from Canada. And he was saying, if people tell you to be quiet about gender equality, speak louder. So he was absolutely amazing. And the atmosphere was very, very collaborative. So many subjects were covered. There were over 300 in the UN side events area, and there was 300 more events in the CSO area. So Fernanda, our president-elect, she was speaking in this session on female genital mutilation. This was another area on national women machineries. That was Judith from Canada on our team. And a lot of the sessions, you had a panel of speakers who spoke different languages. So you had this cup you put over your ear, and they would give you the translation of what was required. So I always heard things in English. So that was very interesting to experience. The security was tight, and every room was emptied and checked for bombs before the next group went in. And in this group here, I think there were 7 ministers of gender equality around the world were partaking in this event. Some sessions were held outside of the UN. This one was held in the Rwandan embassy. It's actually the mission at the UN. And so hosted by the Men Engage Alliance. The Australian delegation consisted of only 3 people, and this was Padma Raman, who led the delegation, because they did not know when the election would be called, and if we were in caretaker period, they would not have been able to have sent a delegation, so they kept it small. These were some of the social events. The Zonta Club of New York hosted an event, and this event was the UN Symphony Orchestra, volunteers, and the whole night was about women, female composers and female conductors. And they presented these were the 2 female conductors who were twins from Mexico, very dynamic. And the composers of the music were also acknowledged. Brilliant night. Just bear with this one. You never knew what was happening, but this summed up the spirit. So you just didn't know what was going to happen next, just very inspiring. In the political declaration for CSW, the adolescent girls were referred to for the first time, gender-based violence, sexual violence, all the normal suspects were in the declaration. But what was striking was what was missing. What was not included, sexual and reproductive health and rights and climate change commitments. And that's because the USA and Argentina refused to sign off on them, because everyone has to agree in the statements. So the CSW, this was the 30th meeting since Beijing. They were looking at how to revitalize the processes on their process and stakeholder engagement, and also on their content. So given the environment that we're working in, we cannot assume that CSW will always meet in New York in future. So I just wanted to sort of let you be aware of that. So what can we do? I also visited Zonta International headquarters in Chicago, and they're actually on the 3rd floor of this building. Very small headquarters. There's only about 12 staff in total, and some of those are part-time. Zonta's response has been immediate. In February, our international president gave this statement. And then she says, our commitment to advancing women's rights remains steadfast and unwavering, regardless of the political or societal pressures we may face. Together, we will not back down in the face of adversity. So she was very strong. The next statement she put out was in March, when America came out of the Sustainable Development Goals. Achieving SDG 5 is more critical than ever, especially in light of recent pushbacks on gender equality. The time to act is now. We must not allow decades of hard-won progress to be reversed. Zonta International urges leaders and citizens alike to stand up, speak out, and take decisive action. So our international projects are at risk, okay, because of AusAid's defunding. So UNFPA's program has been affected. So at the moment, our project for Climate and Power is not directly affected. We've got the funds to do the work, and they can provide the work, provide the job. Our End Child Marriage project is embedded in a larger project, of which the US has taken out $5 million. And then in Project LAHA, the US has taken out $1.5 million out of the overarching project. So our pieces of those projects are intact at the moment. but Zonta International is watching the situation with interest to make sure that what we're paying for can be provided. So it's just to show you how it's impacting the world. I visited some Zonta clubs in Louisville. They pay by check for their meetings, which surprised me. And also in Ashtabula in Ohio, they made me very welcome. So it was lovely to meet Zontans from around the world who are all experiencing the repercussions of the new legislation, the new administration in America. And I also visited with the Shannon Riley and Kate Edrin, who do the program management and communications at Zonta headquarters. And I stayed with Angela Brokeman from the Zonta Club of Louisville. She hosted me during my stay, which was lovely. Some of you would have met Angela in Brisbane when we presented together there. So in short, gender equality and climate action are under threat. We need Zonta on steroids now. We need to stand up and speak out, especially to our politicians during the election, because we don't want to end up like the USA. Okay, so is the United Nations under threat? Not if we can help it. So that gives you a summary of my time in New York. So did any of you have any questions or commentary about that? No, a little heart, shakes of the head. Yeah, I know. Did you feel angry? Very angry. Caroline?
It's really just an observation, Sue. I recently helped another club with an application to a multinational organisation who are headquartered in the USA, only because we had charitable status and this other club didn't. And everything was going fine. We were really just getting the money when they came back and said, please remove the word advocacy from your application. It was like, oh, and they said, you have to. Otherwise, you won't get the funding. So that was quite chilling. Clearly, that was as soon as that sort of DEI stuff came out, the application was halfway through and it had to be redone to remove the word advocacy, considering it was funding for young female engineering, graduates. You would have the word advocacy in there, but no longer. So we did get the money, but it was chilling, really, to the company itself. It wasn't on their agenda, but it was clearly something that they had to start implementing.
Thank you. And I noticed, Desiree, you've put the link in so we can keep up to date on the Zonta website. Desiree, do you want to speak? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Thank you for that summary of CSW. That was excellent. I guess I'm putting a different Zonta hat on. I'm the international chair for the Zonta Foundation for Women Development Committee. And so, we have been watching very closely what's happening with the funding for our projects. And I suppose just a plea to everyone to donate to the foundation. We're in the middle of our 40th anniversary campaign. And if you look back at the 40 years of incredible support that we have given women around the world, it has never been more critical, and we need to make sure that we've got the funds for our part at least, and even a bit extra would be nice. So if you do get one of those emails about the 40th campaign, please just give whatever you can. $10 is fine, but we all just need to kind of collectively make sure that we can keep our projects going. Thank you.
When I was on my trip, people were saying, oh, how can you go flying such long distances when for sustainability purposes? And I explained that I try to manage my carbon budget. I now got an electric car and I walk and do whatever I can. I choose what visits I have. I stay longer, try and get direct flights, newer aircraft, all those sorts of things, and try and offset my emissions to a certain extent by supporting projects that actually help rehabilitate the local landscape. But one of the projects that's recommended by the UN is one which has women doing water wells, so they don't have to walk so far to collect water. And it's actually a gender equality project. And it got me thinking, one of the best ways that we can do to help offset our emissions is to improve gender equality. And the best way to do that is to donate to the foundation. So if you want to travel, donate to the foundation as well. It's because improving gender equality is improving climate. So it's just a way of thinking about it, you know. So anyway, that's my take on it. Sue?
Good. This morning I was talking to Kate Thwaites, who's spoken to Zonta Australia, who's the member for Jagga Jagga and Assistant Minister for Women at the moment. And she actually came down to Yarra Flats Park this morning. And I mean, we're very fortunate to have women like that in our court. And I'm not telling anybody how to vote, but we need to make sure that the politicians we're getting are these very dynamic women as much as we can. I mean, Kate will probably keep her seat. That's not probably a huge problem for her.
Yeah.
But yeah, we definitely need to think about that very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Kate's very happy to do that Zonta Australia questionnaire.
Brilliant. That's good. Excellent. One of the things we talked about when I was in head office was the Elevate Equality on Earth Day, the 22nd of April. And we've got 4 things: support local sustainable groups and businesses, and they encourage you to think about giving a certificate to those that you are to recognise their efforts. Support local disaster response initiatives, and through our disaster ready guides, we have some direction on that. Lead the conversation about gender equality, and they had a template that you can use to do an op-ed in a newspaper, and also supporting Zonta Says Now activities through our think tanks and also through the virtual art gallery. And the 2025 collection in the virtual art gallery will be launched on Earth Day, 22nd of April. And the final version of the video is on our website at zontasaysnow.org.au. I think most of you have seen it, so I'll nip through that one. And we'll go to Zonta Australian News, and I'll hand over to Bridget.
Thanks, Carole. Well, the most exciting thing that's happened in the last couple of weeks is that Sam Mostyn has accepted our request to be the patron of Zonta Australia. So we're more than excited. We sent the letter off probably August, September of last year, and sort of made the allowances for Christmas, and then thought, oh gosh, this is getting a long time. And then just as we were thinking it's never happening, it did. So that was quite exciting. The other couple of things I think I just want to mention was Carole mentioned the SDGs in the US withdrawing their support for that. Zonta International then issued that statement about the continuing support. We used that as a basis for a letter to government urging them to not even think about it, that it's good that they're continuing to support the SDGs, and we urge them to continue to do that. We also, on a completely different topic, sent a letter to Australian cricket protesting the fact that the Afghanistan can have a men's team in the international competition, but there is no women's team, and that's in direct contravention of the ICC rules. It was really just they know that, and they're not changing it. And their response is about they have brought the Afghan women's team to Australia, which is a good thing to do in a way, but it's not what is really needed, and it doesn't give recognition to the issues in Afghanistan or for that facing women over there. We also have put together a paper which went through each of the issues as they as they relate to women across Australia, and what the current status of those are from a political point of view and policy point of view, and then a series of questions, and that's gone out to all the districts. So if your club hasn't seen that yet, it's really meant to be a prompt for your conversations with candidates, and it's a bit like we've been talking about today, talking with local candidates about the issues that are already current, but the emerging ones as well, and giving members a suite of words, I suppose, and a bit of a background on each of the issues, so that they've got an updated version of the question. If you want anything else with that, or your club wants something else or hasn't seen it, please yell out and we'll make sure you get that paper. On a more practical level, area meetings in full force, and we have a Zonta Australia presentation that's happening at each of those. And again, it's because we're relatively new. It's to continue the, I suppose, socialisation of Zonta Australia and what we can provide to members across Australia, particularly at the, and I'll say the word out loud, advocacy level. And there's a survey of members out there at the moment, and each of the clubs are looking at what are the priorities, so that Zonta Australia will have some insight into what's important for each of the clubs and what in those issues may be important from a national advocacy perspective and what we might do about that. So the last thing is, you heard me when I mentioned to the guest speaker about Zonta Australia wanting to form some partnerships. We're becoming very cognizant that we're a very small group, but there are a lot of issues out there, and 9 times out of 10, we're not the subject matter expert in those types of issues. And so we're thinking about how we may form some partnerships, and then the advocacy flows from there. We need some help sometimes to actually craft what the issue is, what the most contemporary view about it is, and then what, from a Zonta Australia perspective, the advocacy should address. So that's just in its baby stages, and we're just forming how that might look, and we might take one issue at a time. For instance, I know that there are a few clubs around Australia who are passionate cricket people, and they're just appalled at what's happening with Afghanistan. We also have clubs that are well and truly vested in issues around climate change, and each of them have, so we know that there are plenty of passionate people, but we also know there's plenty of expertise out there in each of them. So we just want to harness that in some way. And that might be it for my Zonta Australia colleagues. Bernie, I think you might be, are you the only one on there from Zonta Australia? Did you want to add anything?
You covered off everything very well, Bridget.
Thank you. I usually forget one or two things.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Bridget. Also, what a reminder that we have our district conferences later in the year. So giving a plug out for the 3 events in September, starting off with District 23, then District 22, and then District 24. So just put them in your diaries if they're not there already. And on the local scene, I did a talk. Caroline, you have your hand up. It's all right. You're on mute.
Bridget may have already done this, but have you circulated the response from Cricket Australia? Because I think that might be interesting for our members.
Bridget?
Hang on. So we've sent 2 letters, one from the club, because when they knew Zonta Australia, the club I'm in, they've got a response. I haven't got a response from the Zonta Australia one yet. But I'm expecting that any day, because they only got theirs a couple of days ago. So as soon as I get it, that gets circulated to your district governors, and then just through your normal communication mechanisms, that will get circulated.
Great. There was lots of events during International Women's Day, and I attended this one in Kyneton, and they had this nice little Zonta Says Now window for photographs, which I thought was quite pretty. Sue, did you want to give the report that Sandra provided for the...
I'll just do that very briefly.
Yeah.
So Sandra and Lynn Simons went to the Women's Climate Congress in Castlemaine, the 28th to the 30th of March. And we have heard from Janet Salisbury before, who is the person who has founded Women's Climate Congress. And it's interesting because the idea actually comes from the passion and inspiration of women in 1915 who started a women's peace movement. So just some of the really interesting women who were there. And the fascinating thing is there's a lot of women who are very involved in climate action. There's a lot of women who are involved in female climate action groups or groups that have a number of females in them. And so it's really good for us to know all this and work with some of these groups as much as possible. So some of the people there that others might know are Victoria Mackenzie McHarg, the CEO of Women's Environmental Leadership Australia, which is WELA, which most of us know. Sharon Burrow, who was formerly the president of the ACTU, who is now a global advocate for human rights, and the Australian convener of Women Leading on Climate Action and Just Transition. So that's an interesting one. Some of the organisations that were there were organisations like the National Rural Women's Coalition. So it's good that organisations like that are coming on board in terms of a climate perspective. The Older Women's Network, the Executive Director of She Changes Climate organisation. So there's a lot that we can learn, not only from the information from their sessions, but there's a lot of groups that we can find out a bit more about and see where we connect and how we can work with each other too. So it was wonderful that Sandra and Lynn made the time to get across to do that.
Brilliant. I can see a long-term partnership developing with the WCC because we're so much aligned. I just want to quickly point out this document came out from For He for She, A Fair World for All Women and Girls, which had some really interesting stats in it. And it's all quite colourfully done, so you might want to look at that at your leisure. Vote Compass is out. There's nearly 500,000 people have actually gone into it so far for this election, and it shows you how your own personal views align with those of a political party. I remember my mum doing, my late mother doing Vote Compass. She always thought she was a die-hard liberal. She did Vote Compass and realised that her values were those associated with the Greens party, and she had no idea until she did Vote Compass. Anyway, it's really interesting to do.
Yeah.
This is what the Climate Council's put out on the election policy scorecard. How do the biggest parties measure up on climate and energy? So there's no real surprises, but I was surprised at how many reds. I thought there'd have been at least some yellows and things in here. That's legislating science-backed targets, ending new fossil fuels, powering the country with renewable-backed storage, and electrifying industry and switching to zero-emission fuels, accelerating shared active and electric transport, and better protecting Australians from climate impacts. So you can see yourself as to what the colours are. I know that people make their voting choices based on a wide range of issues, not just on climate, but this is where each of the parties stand on climate at the moment. And you can get that on the Climate Council website. WELA, the Women's Environmental Leadership Australia, are actually doing a screening of Mrs. Robinson. Mary Robinson, absolute consummate gender equal climate action justice advocate. She's got this film and it's a free viewing and you can sign up from the WELA site. And I just can't wait to see it. And that's on Earth Day. So there's 2 viewings at 12:30 and 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. Women's Agenda, they've got an online conversation with all the main members for all the parties. They're waiting for the Liberal candidate to be confirmed, but that should be an interesting conversation as well. So you can see these. I'll put the slides on the website and all the hyperlinks will work from that. And then the next meeting is on Saturday, the 14th of June. And notice we're going back to Saturdays. This week was abnormal because we changed the dates because of the area meeting yesterday. And so I look forward to seeing you then. So is there any other questions from anyone that you'd like to share before we go? No, that's great. And well, I thank you all very much for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you on Saturday, the 14th of June. So until then, keep breathing, keep smiling, and have fun. Bye for now.
Thank you, Carole. It was a great session. Thank you, Carole, very much.